Hello, everyone. I'm Christy Blyzeffer with Poets and Quants, and thank you for tuning in to our Faculty Fireside Chat. Today, we're talking with Melissa Graebner of University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She is the Associate Dean of Entrepreneurship and the Robert C. Evans Endowed Professor of Business Administration at the Gies College of Business. Thanks very much for joining us today, Melissa.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, why don't we just start with a bit of a more detailed introduction? Tell us what inspired you to become an academic and what led you to Gies.
So it was a long journey. When I was growing up and an undergraduate in college, I was interested in a lot of different things and actually had quite a hard time settling on a major. But I ended up studying industrial engineering, which has a lot of business in it. And I really enjoyed that. And I went after college to work in management consulting, which was a great job to get a wide range of industry and functional area exposure. Then I went back to school to get my MBA to figure out my next step. And a light bulb went off for me when I looked at my professors and I thought, I think their job seems really cool. I could see myself doing that. So when I finished my PhD, instead of going out and getting a job, I actually went into a PhD program. But I had another detour after that and ended up going back into management consulting, working on technology mergers and acquisitions, which was related to my dissertation topic, so it was aligned, and also working on internal knowledge development. And what I realized from that experience was that even a knowledge development role in a consulting firm is different from being a professor in at least two ways. One is that on the research side, the kind of knowledge development that consulting firms do is very 80-20 rule. You're trying to get to a good answer in some kind of reasonable amount of time. And in academia, it's different. We really are trying to get to the very best answer, even if it takes longer, and to eliminate any possible alternative explanation. And I found that the way that I think and go about things was a really good fit for that. I like being thorough and thinking through all the possible explanations. And I've also always enjoyed teaching roles. And there's a lot of teaching and training in industry, but it's different than in a university setting because in a consulting firm or any kind of corporation, the training is really aimed at making that person more productive and more successful in that organization. And as long as that aligns with the individual's interests, that's great. But at universities, we have this beautiful freedom that we are really trying to help educate people so that they'll be successful and productive and fulfilled in whatever their dream is. And so to me, that's really meaningful and rewarding. So I decided to go back to academia, and I have my first faculty job was at the University of Texas. I was there for 16 years and then got a great opportunity to come to the Gies College of Business in 2019. And I've been here and loved it ever since.
Ah, very good. That's an interesting distinction between training for employees and training for students. That's really kind of interesting. Well, tell us a little bit more about your area of focus and why you chose the subject matter you did.
So when I was a PhD student, there was a lot of buzz around big tech companies acquiring small tech startups. And I thought that was a really interesting phenomenon. And the way you pick a research topic is usually to try and find this balance of what's something that's a phenomenon in the world that matters, that's important, and at the same time hasn't been studied and has some kind of interesting conceptual questions around it. And so what I realized was that there was a whole lot of research on mergers and acquisitions, but no one had really looked at it from the perspective of the company that's being acquired. They were always sort of viewed as just a passive player and like a product on the grocery store shelf that the buyer goes out and just picks whatever they want. And so what I decided to do was look at it from the perspective of the entrepreneur and to understand how do they decide to sell their companies? What levers of control do they have to influence whether they get acquired and who they get acquired by. And so that's what I studied for my dissertation. I did in-depth case studies of a group of entrepreneurs that were thinking about whether to sell their companies. And I just found that fascinating. I've always been drawn to topics where we can see the interplay of economic concerns and personal concerns and interpersonal concerns, sort of the drama of business, because they're always all there. It's never just an economic decision.
Yeah.
And so when you're selling your company, that's your baby, all of the things are involved. You care about the money, but you also care about what happens to these people that have been by my side. And what happens, to me. Do I get to continue to flourish in this organization? So that initial piece of research led me on to two directions in my subsequent research. So I have one stream that looks at mergers and acquisitions, and then the other looks at other kinds of decisions that entrepreneurs face and how that mixture of economic and personal and relationship concerns all blend together in those decisions.
Absolutely. Well, what do you consider your most significant or meaningful finding from your research or work so far?
So there was one article that came out from that early research that was, I think, really interesting, both from a practical perspective and from a conceptual perspective. So I had noticed this pattern that these entrepreneurs were very excited when they sold their companies and they felt like they'd found a good fit. And it wasn't just about the money. It was, they felt like had found a buyer that was going to really appreciate them, give them a lot of autonomy, take care of their people, and nurture their product and their technology. But when I would follow up with them a few months later, most of them were pretty disappointed. And it wasn't about the money. It was, they told me that I'd be able to run my own show. And now I'm just a VP and I have a boss and I'm being micromanaged. Or they told me they wouldn't lay off any of my people or ask them to move. And now they've asked them to relocate. And they've shut down my product line. They promised they wouldn't. And they felt really betrayed. And I thought, these are smart, savvy people. Something is going on here that explains why they're being disappointed. And what I eventually realized was it had to do with trust, and that the founders, when they're selling their ventures that they had put all of this energy and time and commitment into, they only wanted to deal with someone that they trusted. And they viewed this as a relationship that was very personal. And the conversations they had with the buyer, they thought were really building something very deep. But the buyer just didn't see this in the same light at all. They thought of this as a business transaction and a tough negotiation. And several of them said the exact same thing, that this was like a poker game. And in a poker game, you're allowed to bluff. That's part of the expectation. You're not breaking the rules. That's fully taken for granted. And so they would say things during the negotiation that they didn't know would necessarily be true. They would say, oh, we don't plan to lay off your people. We think your technology is great, even though in their mind, they really knew that that might not end up being true. And then after the deal closed, and these things started to happen, the founder whose venture was acquired felt lied to. And the buyer felt like, what are you talking about? It's not in the letter of the contract. And everyone knows that in negotiations, there's bluffing. So it was these completely different construals of what the situation was that kind of set this up for disappointment later. And that particular finding, I think, has a lot of practical value for entrepreneurs, that when you're selling your company, you need to be very careful to have your eyes open. And if something isn't in writing, if it's just a verbal promise that you had when you were chatting at the coffee shop, you can't assume that'll be true. And at the same time, it raised a lot of conceptual questions, because there's this idea now that trust is not always reciprocal, that one person can trust the other, but not vice versa. And that raised a whole set of questions about other kinds of business relationships, both within an organization and between organizations. So I was really proud of that piece of work because of the conversations that it could start in the entrepreneurial world and in the academic world.
Yeah. I'm just curious of whether, you get to bring that kind of finding out in your classroom, and how does that, what do you when you get to do that, how does that feel?
Oh, that's such a great question. And there really is no better feeling than sharing something about your research and having someone say, "Oh my gosh, that really explains something that I experienced." Or better yet, I had a situation where there was a write-up about that study, and an alum of the university where I was working at the time saw it in an alumni magazine while he was in the process of negotiating to sell his company. And I met him a couple of years later, and he put two and two together and said, "Wait, are you the person who did that study? That actually like came at just the right time for me. It changed how I was negotiating the sale of my company." And so that was just amazing to me. And I absolutely try to share research insights with my students, both mine, but just in general, everything that's in the body of research about entrepreneurship. There's so much that I think students can benefit from that'll save them from some mistakes and pitfalls that they might otherwise hit.
Absolutely. Great story. Thank you for sharing. Kind of put you on the spot with that one.
That's okay.
As you think about the future of your area, is there an aspect that excites you most, or you think will have a kind of unique impact on business?
So, a lot of my research involves qualitative methods, which is doing interviews in the field, observing people, watching them, how they behave, which they might not necessarily even be aware of themselves. And traditionally, most business school research has been quantitative and based on archival data. And there are a lot of great things about archival data. You can get huge data sets. It's easier to acquire. And so there are lots of studies that look at fluctuation in stock prices, for example. And we've learned a great deal from that. But there are things that you learn from talking to people and watching people in the field that are really complementary to that, that help you get insight into some subtleties about social processes. And when you go into the field, you also often get surprised because you don't necessarily go in with a theory and a hypothesis. You sort of go with an open mind and can be really surprised by what you observe. And so that creates a lot of new innovative theories. And when I came to Gies, I was given some funds to start a qualitative research initiative. And it has been so much fun to see how qualitative research has grown at Gies. And we have people doing qualitative research in my areas of entrepreneurship and strategy, but also in marketing, in international business, in operations, organizational behavior. And this will probably surprise people, but we have several accounting professors that do qualitative research. And it's amazing the kinds of insights that they're getting about how people conduct accounting research, where fraud comes from, how people make decisions in ambiguous circumstances. And so I'm really optimistic and excited about the potential for qualitative research to be even more common in our field and to introduce some new ways of seeing old questions.
Absolutely. Well, what do you like most about teaching business students at Geese? And maybe what do you find kind of challenging?
I love our students. They're a great group. They are bright and curious and engaged, and they come from all over. So it's a really interesting mix. We have students from small towns in downstate Illinois. We have students from the heart of Chicago, and we have students that come from all over the world. And it's a really rich mixture that's fun to teach because they all have unique perspectives when we have discussions in class. I think one thing that's a challenge, not exclusive to Geese, it's really a challenge in all higher ed right now, but it's the advent of generative AI. and trying to figure out what that means for education. Because, on the one hand, this is a technology that students will be using in the workforce. It can create a lot of efficiencies. We know, for example, that business plans generated by AI can be as good or better than ones that are generated the old fashioned way. So we want to empower students to use those tools. But at the same time, there are things that we want to teach them that they should be able to do independently. So figuring out that balance is tricky. And then there are also issues of ensuring academic integrity. Do we make sure that it's a fair playing field, and what kind of rules are appropriate? So I think, we're in the midst of working all that out. Fortunately, Geese is a pretty forward-thinking place, and I think we're having the right conversations and thinking about it with the right values. But it does require some change in mindset about how you structure classes, what kinds of assignments you get, how you grade them, to prepare students with the right knowledge, but also that they're familiar with the technology that they'll be using in the workplace.
Yeah, it's going to be real fascinating to look forward a few years to see where we're all
Yeah,
going to be in terms of that. So, well, what has been the most surprising thing about becoming a business school professor?
we don't really get the summers off. Contrary to popular opinion and even my own family, we really don't. We're busy year round. It's different in the summer because most of us aren't teaching formal classes, but we're doing research, we're doing journal reviews, participating in conferences, we're restructuring curriculum to prepare for the fall. So the summer ends up being pretty busy.
Yeah. Oh, that's a bummer for a lot of yeah, a lot of wannabe professors out there.
Yeah.
That's hard news. So, if you weren't a business school professor, where do you think you'd be right now?
That's a tough question because I think being a business school professor is probably the best job in the world, at least for me. But when I was in college, I was initially doing the pre-med track along with industrial engineering. And I really debated whether to become a doctor. And I think I could have done that, and that also would have been a great career. And what I realized was what attracted me to both being a business school professor and being a doctor is this sense of you're using knowledge to help people and to create a better world. And I find being a professor is really rewarding. But the teaching and the research, I have this sense that I'm helping people with new ideas. So I'm lucky to have found a good match for me.
Very good. Well, if you had your way, the business school of the future would have much more of what?
Lifelong learning. Um, what I've realized is most of our students, or really we call them learners because many of them, they're not full-time students. We're not just a season in their lives, or at least we shouldn't be. We want it to be a partnership that they have for the rest of their careers. So when circumstances change, which they will, it's not just AI, it's changes in the global economy and policies. People have changes in their own families or other reasons that they need to develop new skills and explore different career paths, or maybe they're just advancing in the same organization where they started, but still, when you advance in your career, you need new skills. You have a different set of challenges. And so I think we want people that come through Geese to feel like this is a home for them that they come back to for additional learning and for community. And we welcome them back because they have a lot to give too, bringing back their experience, mentoring our students, speaking in our classes. So I really will enjoy seeing that grow and having our alumni spend more and more time with us, whether they're 2 years out or 20 years out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Melissa, for sharing your research and your career with us. Maybe to close, Is there anything that you could say to like maybe student viewers that are exploring business schools to maybe enroll in a program? What would you say of why they should give Geese a look?
What a great question. So Gies is, I think, the most innovative business school in the country, maybe in the world. And I say that with some bias, but also with some data behind it. Our previous dean, Jeff Brown, won an award as Dean of the Year. Our IMBA program was the MBA program of the year. And our current dean, Brooke Elliott, started her job saying, the revolution's not over. This is the second revolution. And she means it. So all of the change and innovation that happened in the last few years, we are just doubling down on it and doing more and more. But we're not changing for the sake of change. We're very values driven. And those values are at the center of everything we do, creating and delivering a unique uh, learner experience that gives every student a sense of community and belonging, creating excellent, cutting edge new knowledge, engaging with our alumni. These are all things that are front of mind for us. And it all falls under the umbrella of business with purpose, that we really are trying to help our learners to find and achieve their purpose. So I think it's a very special place. It's an exciting community, but at the same time, it's a very caring community. And that's a special combination. I think a lot of times you might get one or the other, but to have both together is pretty distinctive.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Melissa. We're always, really watching to see what Geese does next for sure. And of course, thanks to all the viewers for tuning in to our faculty fireside chat. And we have a lot more information on about Geese specifically and lots of business programs generally on our website and more chats like this on our YouTube page. So until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you.